Hi everyone, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here for day 3 in a week-long Winter Wonderland video series featuring Penny Black's newest scenic stamps. And here is a look at the stamp that we'll be creating with today. This is 40-874 Snowfield. This is a really great stamp if you are new to doing scenic stamping. So in this series, I'm sharing 2 cards in each video featuring these stamps, one card in a very simple non-painting technique and the second in a more layered and watercolor painted technique. So let's go ahead and begin with technique number 1. This requires no watercoloring and it features a really simple classic style, and it's really quite easy to do, but in the end the result is beautiful. So I'm going to start. I am working in my MISTI stamp positioning tool. I'm inking up my stamp section by section, and I'm stamping onto Strathmore Bristol smooth paper. And I'm starting by inking up my stamp with a very light blue. And I'm using the mini archival inks because they are easy to get onto the stamp exactly where I want them. Now, if I get a little bit onto a part of the stamp where I don't want it, like some of this blue onto the fence, I just swipe it away with my fingertip before I stamp. If you don't want to get your fingertips as colorful as mine, you can also just use a paper towel to do that. So I did the first layer in a very light blue, and now I'm adding a darker blue just right on top of that, and I'm applying that closest to the trunk and extending out a little bit, but this just creates some variation in those branches so they aren't all the exact same color of blue. Next, I'm going to ink up the fence. Now, as always, down in the YouTube description box, you'll find a complete listing of all the supplies I'm using, like inks, markers, papers, paints, and of course the Penny Black stamps and dies will be listed and linked to our online store, and all of that down in the YouTube description box below. Now here I am grabbing a Tombow dual brush pen just to put a little extra darker color here onto this fence. Now the marker allows me to get that right into those details onto that fence without going over onto the tree. And I just noticed here I wanted to darken up those branches a little bit. That is it. You can stamp that beautiful scene that quickly. And then to finish off the card, I'm using our Stitch Circles creative die. And I'm also using this new creative die nestlings. It's so great to have these little birds you can position onto these trees. It just adds a little extra something. And my sentiment comes from our Jolly Snippets transparent set. And I just took that circle die and moved it around over the top of the stamping, that I did, until I found exactly the right peak of that scene that I liked. And then I adhered that on top and added the birds. And there is a look at the finished card. So now this second technique adds a bit of watercoloring and stamp layering, and today we're even going to do some embossing, but it's still very doable to create your finished card. So first things to start off, in my MISTI stamp positioning tool, I just have a piece of Eclipse masking paper. It's kind of like a giant sticky note, and I'm going to be using a mask a little bit later on. So I'm just stamping here just right along the horizon line of that scene, and I'll set that aside, but you'll see it come back in a little bit. So now I am still stamping onto that Strathmore smooth Bristol paper, and I'm going to start here by coloring onto the fence using my Tombow dual brush pens. And I added a lighter brown and now just a little bit of a darker brown along the bottom of those fences, and I will stamp that down. And now what I do is I'm just grabbing a paintbrush. Off to the side I have a little cup of water and a paper towel, and I dip my paintbrush into that cup of water, dab it off on the paper towel so it's not too wet, and then I just paint right over the top of that stamped ink. Now because I'm using water soluble markers, I can go in now and just blend this, and it sort of instantly looks like, oh, I'm just painting this beautiful fence, but I'm just basically just blurring out or barely touching that watercolor paintbrush over that fence that I stamped. Next, I have grabbed some Distress inks. So on the first card, when I wasn't doing any painting or water, It didn't matter what inks or markers I grabbed, although when you're coloring directly on your stamp, you want to use a water-soluble marker, not like an alcohol-based marker. But for this card, since I want to go in and blend with water afterward, I want to choose both water-soluble markers, of course, and water-soluble inks. So Distress inks are great for that. And they have the mini size, which I love. So I've stamped down, I put a dark blue right on the trunk of that tree and a little bit out into the branches. By no means am I going to blend on top of all of those little branches there. I don't even want to think about doing that. But here I can just do a little bit there on the trunk so it ties into that watercolor look that the rest of the design is going to have. You'll notice I didn't cover all of the branches, and the reason is we're going to go back and do some embossing on there so we have some white branches, and you'll see how that works in just a minute. Now the stamp has sort of that ground snowdrift shadow there at the base of the fence post, so I just stamped that and then blending that out. I'm going to add a little bit more detail. Now the fence also is designed to look like it has that snow sitting right on top of that. I love that, so I just wanted to add a little black there along that and darken up the trunk of this tree and a couple of those branches coming off as well. Now I have all of the exact colors used listed down in that YouTube description box below. So now here I am taking a VersaMark ink pad. So I cleaned off my stamp off camera. I've inked up my stamp with VersaMark ink and I'm running an anti-static powder tool over my paper. And I'm going to stamp the rest of these branches with this VersaMark ink. Also, I'm going to swipe just a little bit more Distress ink on there. You can see just some more light blue. Then I'm going to take this off and sprinkle it with clear embossing powder. I'm mainly just sprinkling where I stamped the branches, but because it's clear, if any of it sticks onto any other parts of the stamped image, that's no problem. You'll still see the color beneath. Now I love with these scenic stamps to pull in some others, and this is Seasons Marvel. It's really a great set if you want to kind of mix and match and layer up your scenes. So now I have used that mask that we stamped at the very beginning. You can see that down at the bottom of the scene, so it's covering everything below the horizon line. I'm inking up this tree stamp with Distress inks using the mini ink pads, and I'm stamping that onto the scene. I'm going to grab my paintbrush and just blend that a little bit, just adding a little bit of water. You will start to see here those branches that were embossed coming through over the top of that tree. So you can see now it looks like there's these frosty branches extending from that big tree on the right. And that's going to show up even more when we do some ink blending on the background. It is really an easy technique and it feels so magical when you create it. And it's one of those cards when you're done that kind of gets that like, whoa, how'd they do that effect, which is just fun to make and fun to give that. Now I want to layer another tree here. So I just dried what I had stamped and painted there, and I will re-ink this tree. It's the same tree, but I did move it down a little bit to vary the height of the tree. And these trees now are only going to show sort of above that horizon line because we've masked off down below. So I've stamped that and I'm blending it with my paintbrush. And I'm just decided to add a little bit over here on the right, just another tree. So I'm just sliding that over and I will stamp this again. And you can see that this particular scenic stamp, this new snowfield stamp, how easy it is to work with. Cutting a mask is just one little smooth line to cover the bottom. Inking up the tree is very easy to do, and the fence is also very easy to work with. That fence gives it great depth into the image, so automatically you have a really complete and dynamic looking project. So I'm going to remove that mask and now you can see those trees in the background. Now I put the mask back on after peeking at how those trees are, and I've made sure that everything is dry. And here I have an ink blending tool with a foam pad and some distress inks, and I'm starting on that edge of the mask and working up in a circular motion, and I'm creating sort of a sunrise or a sunset look here to the sky. Some wild honey and some rusty Hinge ink there. Then up at the top, I'm going to use some blues, and I'm going to kind of be careful not to have the blue go down into that yellow so I don't create green on the sky. But here, what is so cool, you can start to see those branches that we embossed turning that nice white color, that frosty snow colored look. I'm adding even a little bit darker blue to make that pop even more. And then I can reveal all the snow down below. Now I've just grabbed an old acrylic block and pressed my ink pads onto that, and I'm mixing in a little bit of water. I wanted to add some shadow here coming out from these trees onto the snow. So those same colors I used to ink up the sky, those are the ones I pressed onto that acrylic block, and now I'm sort of using those as paint to create those shadows down in the snow. Now I do want to use some care not to touch too much of that fence or other areas that I've stamped, because that is water soluble ink and it will bleed and blend if more water is added next to it. But if you want to avoid that, after stamping your image, you can actually heat emboss the whole thing with clear embossing powder if you want to sort of seal in those inks and make it easier to add shadows or blend up in your sky. And to finish off this card, I've stamped, I've just used the sentiment set, not the die here, but the Hope Is sentiment set down on that bottom left-hand side of the card. And here is a look at that finished card. I sure hope you're enjoying this video series, or Winter Wonderland video series. If you are, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, hit that bell so you're notified of future videos. Like I said, this is number 3, and there are 3 more of these scenic stamping videos coming your way this week. Thanks for watching, and happy stamping.